When you take the 10,000 person study of the wheel and basically ask the following set of questions, you say, well, number one, integration appears to be the basis of well-being. Number two, consciousness appears to be necessary for intentional change. Number three, what would happen if you integrated consciousness? That's basically what the wheel comes from, this line of reasoning. And then people would find this healing process happen, reducing anxiety, depression, traumatic symptoms, being able to deal with fears of all kinds, including of death, from this more spacious awareness. And the analogy that emerged, this is probably point number 4, as you're harnessing the hub, that's the metaphoric thing, was as if you could think of being aware as being a container of awareness, whereas some people have an espresso cup size container. And if life dishes out a tablespoon of salt as a challenge that every life has, then the water's too salty to drink. But if you learn to expand that container to 100 gallons, then when you put the tablespoon of a life's challenge of salt into the 100 gallons, you can drink it fine. So the question then, that's point number 4, is point number 5, what's actually happening? And so I took the data from the 10,000 person study and I drilled down with quantum physicists that I was spending a long time with, 150 of them actually, for a week. You know, what is energy? What is energy? What is energy? Also, what is time? Fortunately, we had time to do that in this week together. And, you know, what they said, many of them said, was energy, though it comes in different manifestations like, you know, light and sound and electrical energy, chemical energy, mechanical energy, all these things. Ultimately, what those forms of energy share in common is the following process. It's the movement, they say, from possibility to actuality. And what I did then was take the quantum physics view of what energy is, and then this would be point number 6, you know, and I returned to what I've been writing about for 2 decades, which is, could the mind be an emergent phenomenon of energy flow that happens, of course, in your brain, but it happens also in your whole body, and it's also happening in our relational lives. So if that were true, then even if you wanted to stay with the brain and the head, you still want to ask the question, since the brain is a processor of energy and information flow, what actually is energy? So now with this quantum physics view, we could go and say that you could graph out energy flow as being somewhere along what's called a probability distribution curve, where possibility would be at the lowest point if you look at a vertical axis or y-axis of near zero probability. It's not quite zero. Like if I were going to say a word, you don't know what word I'm going to say, and we share 1,000,000 words in common, you know, it'd be 1 out of 1,000,000, you could guess it. So that's close to zero. But once I say, you know, the word, you know, reef for coral reef, you know, you go, okay, it's actualized. From all the possibilities that were there, it turned into the singular word reef. Now, at that moment, we're way up at a peak at 100%. So that's the range of the probability distribution curve. Now, if I say I'm only going to say words related to, you know, the coral reefs, you know, the Great Barrier Reef, and let's say there are whatever, 100 words, obviously there are more, but let's say there's just 100 words, then there's a plateau of only 100 items that you could draw upon to become actualized from that plateau of enhanced probability. So we have 3 things on this graph now. We have a peak of actualization, we have a plateau of enhanced probability, and then if you drop down and you make the graph 3-dimensional, you have a plane of possibility. And when you take the 10,000 person study, and this would be point number 7 probably, you know, you basically say a thought or an emotion or a memory, for example, look like they're peaks of energy moving to this top point on the probability distribution curve. These sub-peak values would be thinking, emoting, and remembering. And then when you get to a plateau, it's like an intention or a mood or a state of mind. And then when you look at the data across all these people have done it, And you hear that when people bend the spoke of attention around, so they're focusing this spoke of attention into the hub itself, or they just get rid of the spoke and just rest in the hub, they describe spaciousness, a sense of eternity with a loss of time, a sense of infinity, that it goes on forever with a sense of interconnection, God, love, joy, peace, tranquility, this combination of emptiness and fullness simultaneously that people describe. And they all say, oh, I can't describe it, I can't describe it. You say, oh, I know it's hard, it's not a word experience, give it a try. So that always starts the thing. So what I began to wonder about was, could the hub of the wheel, which is a metaphor, correlate with the plane of possibility? And if that were true, number one, it corresponds to people's descriptions of what it's like to drop into that space. Number two, for whatever reason, we don't know why, that space correlates with the subjective experience of knowing, of being aware. I don't know why that is. The future generations can figure that out, but that's really kind of interesting. Number three, from a quantum physics point of view, this is the formless source of all form. And so it is both empty of form, but full of potential form. So this is, I think, helps us understand people describing it empty and full at the same time. And when you look at it from the point of view of being a microstate, and in reality, we have both microstates and macrostates. So Sir Isaac Newton figured out large objects' motions and could calculate them. And we live in large bodies, you know, and so there are Newtonian classical physics rules like certainties and the way you have what's called an arrow of time. So Richard, if you and I cracked open an egg, we couldn't uncrack it. So it's a directionality of change called the arrow of time. But at the quantum level, the microstate level versus the macrostate Newtonian classical physics level, at that level, things are about probabilities, not absolute certainties. They're about, you know, an arrow-free existence. There's no arrow of time. And they're also, this is a very controversial point, but the possibility that the act of observation alters the probability value of a microstate, like an electron, for example. There's also an issue about space, where it's been proven now, not even hypothesized and people are wondering about it, it's been proven now without a doubt that entanglement exists where two electrons, let's say, that are coupled, these microstates that are coupled, that are physically separated in space, continue to have influences on each other no matter what the distance. And so that in our Newtonian bodies, we see three-dimensional space as something that's real. But as Einstein himself said, you know, that is kind of an illusion, that space-time separations are kind of how we see things that's not really separated. So entanglement, also called non-local effects or non-locality, has now been proven to exist for microstates. Now, it's harder to see them in macrostates, but there are some initial studies to show they even exist for macrostates. I say all this because, like, one time I was doing a workshop with the wheel, and a woman did it, dropped into the hub, had this expansive feeling of a loss of time, and when she heard the discussion that the hub may be quantum, whereas the rim may be more Newtonian, she said, listen, I live in England, and I live next to Sir Isaac Newton's house. Please come to the apple tree where he figured out gravity and do the wheel of awareness. And so I did. And we had a documentary film guy there, and they made a film of it. It was so fascinating to then say, thank you, Sir Isaac Newton. And he even had a quote in his birth house that said, I can calculate the position of celestial bodies, but I cannot calculate the madness of men. And I think that's because the mind has so many quantum elements. And I always make the joke, and this is good for Australia, you know, where you want to ride in, you know, Qantas Airlines, because then you get in Sydney and they say you're going to go to Los Angeles and you're going to get there. You don't want to ride in Quantum Airlines, because then you get on the plane, they say, you're probably going to get to Los Angeles, you know, depending on how everybody is, you know, focusing their attention, if that's in fact how it happens. So the bottom line of this is the hub correlates with the plane of possibility. And if this proposal is true, and it could be completely wrong, but if it's true, then what it means is when we pause in awareness and we're just being aware, it's not only the subjective experience where we have the sense of knowing, like I clap my hands and you know I'm clapping my hands, that knowing, but it's also the source of other options. The plane of possibility is the formless source through which all form arises. And so when you drop into the hub of the wheel, you're dropping into the plane of possibility. There, other options arise. And instead of trying to make them happen, you let them happen. Because this presence of the plane of possibility is the portal through which integration, this differentiation and linkage naturally arises. And then what becomes so fun about all this is that you look at another person, like when I look at Matt or look at you, Richard, your plane, Richard, and your plane, Matt, and all of our planes are the same. Infinity is infinity. So the more you drop into it, the more you fill with love and connection, because you realize we're just literally, and I'm not just saying this to be, whatever, it's just saying something dramatic. We are literally manifestations that emerge from the same plane. And when you do that, you just fall in love with everybody.
Well, if you want to know more about the science of psychotherapy, come across to our website, thescienceofpsychotherapy.com, and our podcast of the same name, and learn more about the science of you.